Johannesburg. A 66-year-old Meredeli man was killed during a home invasion in the early hours of Wednesday morning. ER24 spokesperson Chitra Bodasing said that the medics had been scrambled for the emergency call at the home at around 3 a.m. It is believed that the man was trying to defend his family when he was shot. Paramedics found him in a room with injuries to the head, she said. Sadly, there was nothing that could be done for him, and he was declared dead. The rest of the family, which included 3 young children, were unharmed, Bodasing added. She said that the police were investigating the murder. The protective instincts of men often put them at risk and occasionally cost them their lives. Hello, and welcome to another series. This one will specifically cover the nature of man and guide us through the common male characteristics seen and experienced as men on a daily basis. Now, one man is the same as another one, yet there is a common nature that exists among men, along with a common general behavior that is ingrained in us. Let us keep in mind that all of human behavior can be plotted onto a bell curve, with the majority of us sitting in the middle, with the exception sitting on the right and the left of the curve. Therefore, do not expect everything discussed to fit the description of who you are. However, it generally applies to the majority. Not all men would sacrifice themselves for their families, but I would go as far as to say that most men, if not all, would have protected a person unrelated to them at some point or another, without any return for their services. Today, we will talk about man the protector. That is the inherent protective nature that exists in all men, over the young, the weak, and women. In my series on understanding women, I talked about societal scale gynocentrism, which is mainly fueled by the protective nature of men over women, especially women they don't know. Therefore, understand that the protective nature of men acts as a double-edged sword, making him both a positive force in society, but is also there to create laws that act generally against male self-interest. Men are the muscle of the human-ape family. In terms of primal animal functions, men are there to carry the heavy loads and carry out the heavy-duty tasks. As a result, a man is both a servant and a bodyguard for his family and perhaps his social group as a whole. Men have historically had duties in protecting women and children, both from the elements and from other attacking forces that were often other men. It would seem to be that one of the primary functions of men, that of the protector, is one that has secured the relative safety that is experienced in modern society. In fact, the protective instincts of men have gone so far as to create an environment that is very different to the environment the human ape evolved in. This happened by exploring the solar system, mastering the rules of physics, and creating technology, which has taken the human ape from the African savanna to caves to huts in small villages to houses built of brick to apartments to skyscrapers. Man has studied man himself and has learned to fight off most deadly infections, and has created vaccines for viruses that wrecked civilizations. Healthcare systems are now in place, and the weak, the sick, and the wounded are guaranteed treatment. Most people live better and longer than the kings of old. That is how much man has advanced in his thinking over the millennia, and expressed his protective instincts to protect his family and society as a whole. This may often be confused with the feeling of exploration and inquisitive thinking in order to understand how things work, but it is in how these findings are applied, leading to protection for those close to us, that show how the man naturally wants to use his knowledge for protection over others. The protective element of manhood and the effect that man had over the course of history in prolonging life and helping the young is challenged by feminists and the like. In the face of evidence, man has made this world a better place for all. Many would argue that man has also tried to destroy it, but the net benefit of man has been an overall positive one in the lives of all of us. Sacrifices are made along the way, and that for many men is something that is to be expected. One man may die after all to save his family and to protect his brothers and sisters. The disposability of men is a generally accepted phenomenon. As with gynocentrism, male disposability is also seen as one of the negative outcomes of the protective role that men play in society. But I don't want to focus on the micro scale so that we can marvel over the achievements of men. What I want to do is to examine the thinking that takes place in a man that enables him to sacrifice time and effort in order to protect others, others who are sometimes unrelated to him. I want to examine the microcosm of the individual man and understand the thoughts, the ideas, and the rationales that take place to enable such sacrifice of resource and life that allows us to feel that it is justified. After all, if we are to remove instinctual responses from the equation, many men have willingly sacrificed themselves over their families, and I will go so far as to say that there is a part of our brain that tells us that if we die for someone else to live, that is somehow good and noble. You see, unlike others, I do not necessarily believe that it is all about brainwashing and all about disposability. Sometimes men who sacrifice their lives do so while simultaneously believing that their sacrifice gives their life some form of meaning. As an atheist and as a person who believes in a high percentage of biological programming that governs our behavior, understanding that life ends when it ends, I can see that sacrifices over complete strangers may in part have some biological explanation, but it doesn't allow for a logical thought process to take place. If we look at the biological drivers, how can we explain a man who sacrifices himself before he has had any children at all, such as men in war, who believe their death is right and just? Because if he dies, his lineage is eradicated, especially if he has no other family, no other siblings, no other cousins at all. But let's start at the beginning of the story. It appears that every boy is born with a sense of duty. The thought of a boy being brainwashed and given an identity of that of a utility is certainly an attractive idea, but it isn't enough to explain this behavior. In fact, boys naturally fight with one another and form natural hierarchies. They train each other to fight, a behavior that is seen in many other species, which seems to prepare them for later life. A life that may include fighting. Boys learn to fight and they form alliances and learn to protect those alliances very early on. As a boy, how many times have you been involved in fights to protect your siblings and your friends? I remember being involved in many fights to protect my friends, and my friends were also involved in fights to protect me. From that, we can extrapolate and say that the bond that one may feel for his family is largely explained by a behavior that is perhaps pre-programmed by our genes. But that can also be felt for people that you have no genetic relationship with. Of course, this does have a biological explanation, that in the past perhaps the members of your group were likely genetically related to you, and it was beneficial to protect them. But in the face of risk of death and the extinction of your own genes, it always makes more sense to protect yourself over everyone else. Through socializing and otherwise, men can form bonds with other men and women that could become friends or partners. These people who are not genetically related to you can become your new extended family. As a result of that socialization, men can feel protective towards people who are not genetically related to them. The protective instinct kicks in for those people as well as people who are related to you. Therefore, we can say that men can and do protect people who are both related and are unrelated to them by blood. Therefore, that instinct is not there to just protect your genetic relations, but rather there to protect the group as a whole. As a man grows, a sense of duty is instilled upon him by society and by biology itself. A man feels that he needs to protect his friends and by extension his greater social group. Men do fight for positions in a hierarchical system, because that guarantees sexual access. But that is not the whole part of the deal. Many men have sacrificed their lives to protect their sisters or brothers without even having a chance to family themselves prior to their sacrifice. Men generally grow and accept that they need to protect their families, their friends, their cities, their countries, and many their own religious groups. Society does not view a man in a manner that is independent of his role, and one of the roles of a man is to protect those weaker than him. In the scope of the family, the man is always expected to be the one who checks out if there has been a break-in. He is the one expected to fight off a thief or any other attacker. A man's family and his role in it is mainly to protect them, though we might think that the burden must be shared and that women are now independent. I'm not yet aware of many instances where the protector role was ever assigned to the woman over a man. That may be the case for children, but it is generally accepted that the man is the protector of the woman and the children, whereas a woman's obligation stops to her children. Men have always wanted to protect women and people who are perhaps deemed weaker than them from exploitation and abuse. I think that is something that was hardwired and something that needs to be actively brainwashed out of our brains to the point that we don't look out for them. You see, in a society where a man feels to be an active part of, he generally sees himself as part of a greater family. As societies become less cohesive and his role is generally marginalized and punished, he feels a disconnect, and when such a time comes where his protection is needed, instead of making an instinctive reaction, he makes a calculated action of walking away from the potential risk. Like I said, the role of the protector is expected of men. But that role doesn't come independent of a power dynamic that puts the man as a dominant figure in his family and in his social group. If that is taken away, unfortunately, so does a sense of duty. The role of a man has always been taken for granted, and that he will always be there and protect. The disconnect from society removes this instinctual response that men have to protect those weaker than them. When that instinct is taken away, then a man really starts to think about his life and make calculated decisions, a cost-benefit analysis if you like, that an instinctual and hardwired response would not have necessarily allowed for. In a world where men are not allowed to be in charge, then men will no longer act as men often do. Personally, I have no problem with that, because you can only take advantage of someone so much. He will either be completely subjugated, or he will turn back and bite you. Men working in a society that actively discredits them and marginalizes their roles are not going to act as men in the past often did. After all, when you're not wanted, you can't be expected to be there when you're needed. As society took from men, men have also minimized their roles to the absolute minimum of what they want to do. They will protect those absolutely close to them, and nothing more. And that is not necessarily good or bad. It simply is what it is. A calculated decision from men realizing that their life is worth more than what their fathers thought. Thank you very much for listening. See you guys the next time.